Hello and welcome back to the latest episode of the Publisher Podcast from Media Voices. I'm Esther Thorpe, and in this podcast we're exploring the people and products powering publishing, both through the podcast and our weekly newsletter, which you can sign up for at voices.media. This week we hear from Megha Garibaldi, Chief Growth Officer at The Atlantic. She leads the consumer revenue vertical, including consumer marketing, and she helped lead The Atlantic to its milestone of 1 million paid subscribers and reaching profitability in 2024. I talked to her about the changes she's seen in audiences' willingness to pay over the years, the differences and similarities of working on membership and subscriber-driven publications, and where she's looking for audience growth in the current challenging landscape. This episode was recorded at FIP Congress, so be warned there is a little bit of background chatter. Megha has spent her career primarily working in news media, with a focus on building sustainable revenue models for journalism organisations. Before she joined The Atlantic, she led consumer revenue growth for The Guardian in North America. So I started by asking her about how she came to join The Atlantic after working on an unpaywalled news brand.
I was at The Guardian for about 6 years, and I was there essentially when the new donations model, it was new then in 2015, started taking off. And so really in the thick of it for the US market, trying to understand how do you get your readers to recognize this is important, and how do you sort of elevate the support element? And yes, that model is free access for all, it's donation based, but the principles of it, when you think about it with relation to what publishers like The Atlantic are doing, there is an overlap in that there are many readers who want to support high quality independent journalism, and be it delivered via a paywall by restricting access or through an appeals process, the intention in many cases are the same. That coupled with, the utility of being a subscriber of a publication, where the benefits, yes, include access to the journalism. It includes kind of understanding the depth and breadth of, so many different topics. It's understanding and being a step closer to really celebrated and excellent writers. In addition to any other benefits, right? Like, for example, we have a print issue which goes out every month. You get an Atlantic tote bag. You can
Yay, tote bags!
Yay for tote bags. So I think so. All of this to say, there is an overlap, and the heart of the fact is that we are taking to readers high quality journalism just in sort of different pathways. And so I don't see it as incredibly different, like, working in, say, a scientific laboratory, or working in a digital marketing agency. I don't think it's that. I think it is, do you understand the impact of the journalism on the end reader, and how do you then take that to them in a way that matches your brand and your vision and your mission and your business challenges?
Is that a message you find is resonating with people when it comes to convincing them to pay? I'm very familiar with The Guardian's sort of big pop-up, it takes money to pay for quality journalism. Do you find that message translates through at The Atlantic, or is it sort of, do you have to be a bit more subtle when it's a harder paywall?
I mean, I don't think it's about being subtle or not. I think it's about how you're matching the moment and the proposition. With The Atlantic, what people recognize is that here is great writing and a great story, and I want to read it. And so the understanding of, if I subscribe to The Atlantic, I get access to all of it, resonates. There are moments where, we go harder in terms of support messaging. So when we are, reporting on something that is sort of touching an emotional side of our readership, where we can illustrate this is why free and fair independent journalism is important, we do that. Sometimes our editor-in-chief or writers will write notes to readers and say, this is why it's so important that we need to be doing the things that we are doing. And so will you support us? Not will you subscribe to us, but will you support us? So I think it sort of ebbs and flows in terms of when you lean in and when you don't. But it's not about, we have to be subtle in a certain instance or not. It's just, how are you matching the moment?
Have you seen there's been a change in how audiences have been willing and able to respond to requests to pay for journalism in the time you've been working on it? Because I'm sort of thinking back to 10 years ago when not many publishers had paywalls up at all, and that has that's completely flipped on its head now.
Right.
So are people sort of more used to paying now, or is it just a case of we just weren't asking before?
No, I think people are, particularly in the US and in certain European markets. You see the Nordic countries where, the propensity to pay is very high. I think people do expect it, especially the audiences that brands like The Atlantic are inherently speaking to. I think there is an expectation that they are potentially going to hit a paywall. And yes, that might turn away a few people, but again, it's on the strength of the brand and the strength of the story. So if you're seeing a story that everybody's talking about, and we've had this so many times at The Atlantic, everybody's talking about this story. It's coming up in all of these conversations at dinner parties or in schools or wherever. There is this idea that, okay, I need to go read this story. And by the way, yes, we have to pay it to read it. I don't think we are in that phase where people are up in arms about people asking to be paid. I think we've kind of eclipsed that moment in certain target markets in the US. Now, that being said, I do think we need to balance that out with what is happening in terms of discoverability, right?
Yeah.
So, when the paywalling model started growing since, say, 2010 onward, that was also the era where most publishers had maybe 50% more in terms of foot traffic to their brands because of search and because of social platforms favoring news. And now that's flipped completely.
Yeah, like the top of the funnel is almost completely...
Exactly. So while consumers are more attuned to this idea that there are subscription models that they probably need to step into to access journalism, brands like us, we do need to balance that out with, but what about discoverability, and how do we then sort of think about the future and not just in the short term? And I think many publishers are starting to think about what this looks like in terms of proper strategies to address that, and certainly we are as well.
Can I ask what some of those are?
Of course. Look, I think, it stems from understanding what is our strength. Just recently, our editor-in-chief, Jeff Goldberg, mentioned, we want to be the greatest collective of writers on the planet, right? So that stems from this idea that we have the best writers, excellent journalism, in-depth reporting and analyses, and that there is going to be a market for that, and there's going to be a demand for more direct connection with the brand and the writers. So how do we then really sort of connect those dots? A good example is probably 6 months or so ago, we launched our author follow feature.
Yeah.
Right? So now readers who are reading, say, Adam Server or Anne Applebaum can press a button and follow them whenever a new story comes out. We are thinking about what community looks like for The Atlantic. We are looking at what brand awareness tactics make sense. So not just, let's build a big glossy marketing campaign, but actually what, on a day-to-day basis, what does brand awareness look like and what are the tactics that underpin it? So we are thinking more thoughtfully about these things, whereas in the era where traffic was just coming our way, we were prioritizing other things in terms of, how do we monetize what we're getting? Because, we were in the era where tens of millions of uniques were hitting us every month.
Is that potentially a bit of a thing that some of that traffic was a bit of a false flag? It lulled us into thinking that audiences were maybe bigger than they are when there would have been quite a high proportion of people who were never going to subscribe?
I think it depends on how you look at it. Is it a false flag in terms of us thinking that the audiences are bigger than actually what the numbers actually look like? I don't think that's true. I think it can be absolutely true that there are millions of people who could be Atlantic readers and who could be Atlantic subscribers, and say similar for other brands. It is true. I think the false piece of it was getting used to this idea it's very easy.
Yeah.
I think that's the false piece of it. It's very easy and comes at a zero cost. Now, the bigger picture is it didn't come at a zero cost. It came at a very big cost for us. But in terms of marketing dollars, it was zero cost. And it was very easy. SEO and social sharing and virality and all of these things. But it doesn't change the fact that based on what your brand is and what your proposition is, there are probably millions of people who would like, appreciate, and maybe one day pay for it. So we try to anchor around that while balancing our the allowances our business can make in terms of cost. So I don't think we are anymore thinking about we're easily going to get tens of millions of people who just stumble upon us. We are expecting to be very thoughtful in going and finding audiences rather than audiences just, coming in through the door. And I think that's the flip.
And I mean, is that going to take sort of more top-level stories, or is this? It's just really difficult when the main source of...
It's really difficult. And what I will say for us at The Atlantic is, it's not my job to think about what the stories are. The stories are what they are because it comes from the newsroom. And I think this is why we do well in a certain case, because there is no influence between the business side and the editorial side and us influencing the newsroom to write something for traffic, or the respect that we have based on that fundamental principle is unshakable. Can you say that certain types of stories are going to drive certain types of readers at certain scales? Sure. But we are not going to be doing that. We are going to operate under the premise that there is an editorial vision, and the sort of constructors of what that looks like in the day-to-day in terms of what we are publishing are firmly on the editorial side. Now, what we can think about is what are the formats, what are the places that we need to thrive at, and what are the skill sets we need to build in this new era, which is slightly different from the previous era. That is something that is very much something that we can really look into, perhaps control, and perhaps make an impact on. So, should we be prioritizing newsletters? Should we make the user journey within those newsletters easier? Should we sort of build a consumer marketing ecosystem that takes that into account? And then do we build a conversion mechanism that is expansive and innovative and is tapping into every opportunity, right? So for example, do we have the right payment methods? Do we have the right way that we're processing cards? Do we have the right protocols in terms of payment failure? All of those things are in our control, and we need to do well with all of those. And that's why it's a little bit of a balancing act. But in a certain sense, if we believe that the journalism that's being produced is incredible and is something that is important for our readership, then that's great, right?
Yeah. How worried are you about the fact that AI can so quickly? I mean, it can't generate incredible journalism, but it can generate pretty good content.
Yeah, it kind of shocks me on a day-to-day basis, to be sure. How worried am I? I do believe that the Atlantic's position in terms of long-form journalism, deeply reported, principles with respect to producing journalism when it comes to AI, that we are about humans, for humans, by humans. I think that builds a little bit of a protective shield for us, because I strongly do believe as we step deeper and deeper into the opportunities of AI for consumers at large, the human connect is going to grow. People are going to feel that if they know a particular piece is written by a person who is thinking about things and is writing it and is able to provide that context, I do think there's going to be value for it.
So it's like leaning into the human-produced
piece. I think AI has opportunities in terms of how we can make our operations effective and how it can help us uncover opportunities and all of those. But in terms of the journalism, it will always be written by humans. Now, that being said, I do think that we have this protective layer. I do worry about, the absolute differences AI is going to make at large for consumers across the world. But I think, knowing what we are good at and building a strategy that aligns with it is the best we can do. And I feel optimistic about it.
I think as soon as those Facebook AI generated videos popped up in my feed, I was off it so fast.
Yeah.
And I thought I could see why people are sort of almost fleeing back to this this need for sort of human created stuff. But that might change. I don't know.
That might change, but I don't know. Call me a fool, but I believe in humanity and humanity trying to find value in what humans are creating.
And there's only so many like AI generated cat videos we can consume. So growth is one thing that's part of your job responsibility, but how do you work to retain subscribers?
Yeah.
So quality journalism is going to be one of those.
Yes, absolutely. Quality journalism is the answer to every question, basically. But, it's interesting because when we started with the paywall in 2019, and I would honestly say right up to 2024, we have been so focused on the acquisition side because we were getting all the, we were turning all the knobs and tightening all the screws and sort of really getting good at it. And we kind of were like, okay, the subscribers will stay with us because we still do have quality journalism. Now that we are at the scale that we are, which is really incredible, we're now really focusing on the subscriber engagement levers. And again, if you don't have the quality journalism, nothing else is going to work. You may have the best processing and you may have the best recirculation modules and you may have the best consumer marketing. Nothing will work if you don't have quality journalism. But we do have really incredible journalism.
Yeah.
So
there's stuff like card expiry dates that can easily knock off like 5% a year.
Exactly. So now we're looking at, are we really set up in terms of involuntary churn, right? Like, okay, people don't want to churn, but for some reason the churn is happening. Payment failure. Are we really processing cards in the right way? So we're now working with the vendor on that. Are we engaging and really looking at the data as to when people are engaging with us? How are they engaging with us? What format and platform? The role of the app. What does that play? How can we develop new sort of offerings? Like we just launched games in June this year with the idea that it's probably going to be an audience development play and a subscriber engagement play.
Because if somebody's reading you every day, right, they're not going to churn.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So also, if you give a subscriber, a really intelligent game, they're just going to think that the value of the subscription goes up because it does. And that shows in the numbers. So we are really thinking very deeply about all of these engagement points, right? Because what we don't want is, and different publishers call this by different terms, but at one point we realized an extraordinary percentage of our subscribers were dormant. So we were like, okay, let's try to wake them up. And then what we realized was actually it's not about waking them up, it's about not letting them go to sleep, right? So that means you need to move some of your engagement tactics to earlier in the life cycle. What does it look like between day 1 and day 60 versus, day 300? So these are things that we are now really focused on getting excellent at because we feel pretty confident with the acquisition ecosystem. And the stakes are higher.
Yeah, the stakes are much higher. Obviously, we're past an age where there's going to be tens of thousands of people flooding into the top of that funnel. But what does successful growth look like to you?
Yeah, successful growth looks like somebody who reads The Atlantic, subscribes to The Atlantic, really enjoys us, and is a meaningful voice in talking about The Atlantic. And be that in the millions or be that in the hundreds of thousands, I'm not going to say it doesn't matter, but what we're focused on is at the heart of that. How can we be a meaningful force in somebody's life while being very clear about our mission and being very, very, very thoughtful about our quality? And that the assumption is that will scale. And that is what has happened. We're at 1.4 million subscribers. That is exactly what has happened. So that is what growth looks like in terms of probably the next 3 years. Another aspect that we're really deeply thinking about is what are sort of new markets where maybe our market penetration isn't that much. So how can we put the Atlantic as it is in front of people, say, in Middle America or in international markets, and see what resonates?
Thanks so much to Megha for speaking to us this week. Don't forget, we've got a write-up of the key learnings from this interview on voices.media, or dropped into your inbox every Tuesday if you sign up to the publisher newsletter, also on voices.media. We'll be back next week with another dive into the people and products powering publishing's future. Until then, keep up with all things Media Voices by following us on LinkedIn and subscribing to the publisher newsletter, also over on voices.media. See you next week.